The deafening echo of a siren sliced through the night air, followed by the shrill sound of shattering glass. A desperate cry for help emerged from the flames that consumed the building. Inside the inferno, a man, covered in soot and sweat, carried a child in his strong arms. It was Henry Turner, a veteran firefighter, racing against time to save yet another life. But this heroic scene was not the present. It was a distant memory, an echo of past glory that now cruelly contrasted with the grim reality Henry faced. In the dimly lit interrogation room of the precinct, Henry, now a 68-year-old man, trembled. His hands, once steady as he gripped a fire hose, now shook as he held an empty wallet. Silent tears traced paths down his weathered face, marked by time and adversity. Before him sat Detective Blake, an imposing figure dressed in a sharp suit, ruthlessly shouting. His voice echoed off the cold walls of the room, accusing Henry of being a common thief, destroying what little remained of his reputation. "Do you think you can fool everyone with this retired hero story, Turner?" Blake shouted, slamming his hands on the table. "We have witnesses who saw you take that woman's wallet at the market. Confess. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, don't forget to follow the channel for more intense content packed with emotional twists." Henry, his eyes downcast, murmured, I didn't do it. I've never stolen anything in my life." But his words fell on deaf ears. The cold, judgmental gaze of the other officers in the room felt like a silent sentence. Henry felt the weight of each accusation, each look of contempt, crushing what remained of his dignity. How did Henry Turner, the local hero who risked his life countless times to save others, end up at this point? The answer lay buried beneath years of silent struggle and a city that slowly forgot its heroes. After decades of dedicated service, Henry retired with a pension that barely covered his basic needs. Inflation ate away at his savings, and his wife's medical expenses drained the rest. Still, Henry never considered compromising his integrity. He would rather go hungry than tarnish the honor he had cultivated throughout his life. But the system he swore to protect now treated him like a criminal. Detective Blake, a controversial figure in the department known for his questionable tactics and shady connections, seemed determined to make an example of Henry. "You will confess, Turner," Blake hissed, leaning over the table, "or I will make sure you spend the rest of your days behind bars." Henry raised his eyes, meeting Blake's gaze. For a moment, he saw something familiar in those eyes. Not justice, but a cold, calculated greed. It was the same look he had seen in criminals he faced over the years. In that instant, Henry realized he was up against something far larger and more sinister than a mere theft accusation. As Henry was taken to a cell, on the other side of the city, in a modest apartment, young Detective Jason Carter sifted through a pile of files. Recently promoted and full of ideals, Jason was an anomaly in the department, one of the few black officers in a predominantly white force. Jason flipped through Henry's file. Something about that story didn't add up. A retired firefighter, decorated multiple times for bravery, suddenly turns into a pickpocket? That doesn't make sense, he murmured to himself. Determined to uncover the truth, Jason began to dig deeper. Little did he know he was about to trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of the police department and change the course of many lives, including his own. The next morning, the news of Henry Turner's arrest headlined the local newspaper. "Fallen hero, ex-firefighter arrested for theft," the headline screamed. The city that once hailed him as a hero now condemned him as a villain. Henry, sitting in his cell, looked out through the small barred window. The blue sky outside seemed to mock his situation. He closed his eyes, remembering the day he received his highest honor. The mayor, smiling broadly, presented him with a Medal of Valor for saving an entire family from a devastating fire. "You are the best of us, Henry," the mayor had said. "An example of what it means to serve and protect." Now, those words sounded like cruel irony. Henry opened his eyes, determined not to succumb to despair. He knew he was innocent and somehow had to prove it. Meanwhile, Jason Carter was diving deeper into his investigation. He reviewed the security footage from the market where the alleged theft occurred. A suspicious figure caught his attention near the victim just seconds before she realized her wallet was missing. The face was not visible, but the posture and build did not match Henry's. Jason decided to visit Henry in prison. Upon entering the visiting room, he was greeted by a man who, despite the circumstances, maintained a silent dignity. "Mr. Turner," Jason began, "I'm Detective Carter. I'm reviewing your case and would like to hear your side of the story." Henry looked at the young detective, seeing a spark of hope in him. "I was at the market that day," he said calmly, "buying some basic items with the little money I had left from my pension. I saw an elderly lady struggling with her bags and offered to help. That was all I did." Jason nodded, taking notes. "Mr. Turner, did you notice anything strange that day? Anyone acting suspiciously?" Henry frowned, thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, there was a man. He bumped into me when I was helping the lady. I didn't think much of it at the time, but he seemed nervous, hurried." Jason felt a thrill of excitement. This could be the clue he needed. "Could you describe this man?" Henry closed his eyes, trying to remember. "He was tall, about my height. Dark hair, broad shoulders. He was wearing a black leather jacket, I think." Jason scribbled furiously in his notebook. The description didn't match Henry, but strangely it reminded him of someone he knew. Leaving the prison, Jason was determined to follow this new lead. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to unearth a secret that would shake the police department to its foundations. In the following weeks, Henry's life in prison was a daily torment. Other inmates, upon learning that he was a former firefighter, treated him with contempt. "Hey, fallen hero," they mocked. "How does it feel to be on the other side of the law now?" Henry endured it all in silence, but each taunt was like a knife to his heart. At night, lying in his cell, he thought of his wife, Margaret, fighting cancer at home, alone. Guilt consumed him. He should be by her side, not unjustly locked away. Meanwhile, Jason continued his investigation, now focused on the mysterious man in the leather jacket. He reviewed hours of security footage from around the market. It was then that he noticed a disturbing pattern. The same man appeared in several unsolved crime scenes over the past few months. Intrigued, Jason decided to take his findings to his superior, Captain Ramirez. But when he entered the captain's office, he was surprised to see Detective Blake inside, speaking in low tones with Ramirez. "Carter," Ramirez said, seeming irritated by the interruption. "What do you want?" Jason hesitated for a moment, sensing the tension in the air. "Sir, I have some new information about the Turner case that I think we should consider." Blake turned, his cold eyes fixed on Jason. "The Turner case is closed, Carter. We have a confession." "A confession?" Jason asked, surprised. "But I just spoke with Mr. Turner, and he insists he's innocent." "People change their minds," Blake said with a cold smile, "especially when facing the reality of prison." Something in Blake's tone made Jason uncomfortable. He knew Henry wasn't the type of man to confess to a crime he didn't commit. Something was wrong, very wrong. That night, unable to sleep, Jason reviewed all his notes. It was then that he noticed something he had missed before. In several of the footage clips, the mysterious man in the leather jacket seemed to be talking to someone off camera. In one of the images, Jason managed to catch a glimpse of the other man's face. His heart nearly stopped. It was Detective Blake. The revelation hit Jason like a punch in the stomach. Blake, one of the most respected detectives in the department, was possibly involved in a series of crimes. And now, he had obtained a confession from Henry Turner. Jason knew he was treading on dangerous ground. Blake was powerful and had connections throughout the department. Exposing the truth could cost Jason not only his job but potentially his life. But he couldn't stand by while an innocent man rotted in prison. With renewed determination, Jason began to scheme a plan to expose the truth and clear Henry's name. In prison, Henry struggled against the rising despair. His confession had been extracted under duress. Blake had visited him, threatening to make Margaret's life a living hell if Henry didn't confess. With a broken heart, Henry caved, sacrificing his freedom and reputation to protect the woman he loved. Now working secretly, Jason began to gather evidence. He tracked Blake's financial history, discovering suspicious deposits in offshore accounts. He also found links between Blake and several known criminals. But Jason knew he needed more. He needed irrefutable proof that directly tied Blake to the crimes. The opportunity arose unexpectedly. Jason learned of a big robbery planned for that night. Suspecting Blake's involvement, he decided to risk it all. Hidden in the shadows near the crime scene, Jason waited. His hands shook as he held his camera, ready to capture the evidence he needed. Hours passed slowly. Jason was about to give up when he saw a familiar car approach. His heart raced as he saw Blake get out of the vehicle, accompanied by the man in the leather jacket. Jason watched, horrified and fascinated, as Blake coordinated the robbery. He filmed everything, Blake giving orders, receiving part of the stolen money, even threatening one of the hesitant robbers. With trembling hands, Jason turned off the camera. He had done it. The proof that would destroy Blake and save Henry. But before he could celebrate, Jason felt the cold barrel of a gun against the back of his neck. "Well, well, well," Blake's voice sounded behind him. "Looks like we have a rat in the nest." Jason's heart raced. He had been discovered. Blake laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Did you really think you could catch me, Carter? I've been in this game long before you were born." Jason swallowed hard, his mind racing to find a way out. "It's over, Blake," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have everything recorded. You can't just kill me and expect it to disappear." "Who said anything about killing?" Blake replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "There are much more interesting ways to deal with rats like you." At that moment, Jason realized the true danger he was in. Blake wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was at the center of a web of crime that extended far beyond what Jason had imagined. "Let's take a walk, Carter," Blake ordered, shoving Jason toward the car. As he was forced into the vehicle, Jason felt the weight of the camera in his pocket. Somehow, he needed to ensure that evidence reached the right hands. The car wound through the dark streets of the city. Jason tried to memorize the route, but Blake made random turns, clearly trying to disorient him. Finally, they stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Blake pushed Jason out of the car. "You know, Carter," Blake said as they walked into the warehouse, "I always knew you would be a problem. Young, idealistic, incorruptible. People like you don't understand how the world really works." Jason remained silent, his eyes frantically searching for an escape route. Blake continued, "You see, this city, it needs people like me. Someone who understands the delicate balance between right and wrong. Sometimes you have to break a few rules to maintain order." "That's corruption, Blake," Jason finally said, his voice firm despite the fear he felt. "You've betrayed everything we swore to protect." Blake laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the empty warehouse. "Corruption? I call it survival, kid. In a world where criminals have all the power, sometimes we need to play by their rules to win." As he spoke, Blake shoved Jason into a room at the back of the warehouse. The young detective was horrified by what he saw. Piles of money, drugs, and weapons were scattered everywhere. It was a true arsenal of crime. "See that?" Blake gestured to the illicit treasure. This is what keeps this city running. The money that funds police operations, that keeps the streets safe. Jason shook his head, incredulous. At the expense of innocents like Henry Turner? The mention of Henry's name made Blake frown. Turner was a miscalculation. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was necessary. We needed a scapegoat, and he served perfectly. Anger swelled within Jason. You ruined the life of an innocent man. Blake shrugged, indifferent. Sacrifices need to be made for the greater good, Carter. It's time for you to understand that. At that moment, Jason realized Blake had no intention of letting him leave that warehouse alive. He needed to act, and fast. With a sudden move, Jason shoved Blake against a stack of boxes. The corrupt detective, caught off guard, fell to the ground. Jason seized the opportunity to run toward the exit. Blake, recovering quickly, drew his gun. Carter, stop now or I'll shoot. Jason kept running, zigzagging between boxes and piles of contraband. A gunshot echoed through the warehouse, the bullet passing dangerously close to his head. As he ran, Jason pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. He knew he needed to ensure the evidence reached the authorities, even if he couldn't escape. With trembling fingers, he began to send the files to his partner at the precinct. Blake, furious, continued shooting. You have no idea what you're doing, Carter. You're putting the whole city in danger. Jason finally reached the door of the warehouse. He could hear Blake approaching, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty space. With one last effort, Jason pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. The cool night air hit his face like a slap. Jason ran down the deserted street, his heart pounding furiously. He could hear Blake right behind him, cursing and threatening. Turning a corner, Jason saw something that made his heart leap. A police cruiser parked on the other side of the street. Gathering his last strength, he ran toward the car, shouting for help. The officers in the cruiser, alerted by the screams and gunfire, quickly exited the vehicle, guns drawn. Blake, seeing the other officers, stopped abruptly. He's armed, Jason shouted, pointing at Blake. He's corrupt. I have proof. The officers, confused by the scene before them, aimed their guns at Blake. Drop your weapon, detective, one of them ordered. Blake, realizing he was cornered, slowly lowered his gun. His face was a mask of rage and despair. You don't understand, he murmured. I did what was necessary. As Blake was disarmed and handcuffed, Jason finally felt the weight of the recent events hit him. He fell to his knees, exhausted and relieved. In the hours that followed, the police precinct became a whirlwind of activity. The evidence collected by Jason was analyzed, revealing a corruption network that extended far beyond Blake. Several high-ranking officers were implicated, including Captain Ramirez. As the sun rose, casting its first rays over the city, Jason found himself sitting in an interrogation room, this time as a hero, not a suspect. He had just finished giving his statement when the door opened. It was the chief of police, accompanied by a man Jason recognized immediately, Henry Turner. Mr. Turner, Jason stood up, his voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. Henry, with tears in his eyes, extended his hand to Jason. You saved my life, son. There are no words to express my gratitude. The chief of police cleared his throat, visibly moved. Detective Carter, on behalf of the department, I would like to apologize for what happened. Your courage and integrity are an example to us all. Jason nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Thank you, sir. But the real hero here is Mr. Turner. He never lost his integrity, even when everything was against him. Henry smiled softly. Sometimes, staying true to your principles is the hardest thing we can do. But in the end, it's what defines us. In the weeks that followed, the city underwent a profound transformation. The exposure of the corruption network led to a complete overhaul of the police department. New protocols were implemented, and an independent commission was established to oversee police operations. Henry Turner, now free and with his name cleared, became a symbol of resilience and integrity. His story inspired many, and he was invited to speak about ethics and courage in schools and organizations throughout the city. Jason Carter, in turn, was promoted and became the youngest chief detective in the department's history. He used his new position to implement reforms and ensure that what happened to Henry would never happen again. On a sunny afternoon, months after the events that changed their lives, Jason visited Henry at his home. He found the former firefighter sitting on his porch, watching children play in the street. "How are you, Mr. Turner?" Jason asked, sitting down beside him. Henry smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his wrinkled face. "I'm well, son. Every day is a gift now." Jason nodded, deeply understanding what Henry meant. "Your wife, how is she?" "Margaret is in remission," Henry replied, his voice full of gratitude. "The doctors say she has a good chance of recovering completely." They sat in silence for a moment, observing the world around them. Finally, Henry spoke again. "You know, Jason, when I was in prison, there were times I thought about giving up. Times when the injustice seemed too great to bear." Jason looked at the man beside him, seeing not just a former firefighter or a victim of injustice, but a true hero. Henry continued, "But then I remembered all the people I saved over the years. I remembered the oath I took to protect and serve. And I realized that, even behind bars, I could still be true to that oath by being an example of integrity." Jason felt a lump in his throat. "You never stopped being a hero, Mr. Turner." "Never." Henry placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "And you, my young friend, have shown that there is still hope for the future. That there are still people willing to fight for what is right, no matter the cost." As the sun began to set, Jason and Henry sat on the porch, two men united by extraordinary circumstances, but even more so by their unwavering belief in justice and integrity. The city around them had changed. The shadows of corruption had been pushed away, at least for now. But both Jason and Henry knew that the fight for justice and integrity was ongoing. It was a battle that would be fought not only in the streets or in courtrooms, but in the hearts and minds of every citizen. And as they watched the sunset, they both silently renewed their commitment to continue this fight, no matter what the future held. Because, in the end, that is what it meant to be a true hero. A year had passed since the events that shook the city to its foundations. The story of Henry Turner and Jason Carter had spread far beyond the city's limits, becoming a catalyst for change throughout the country. On a sunny Sunday morning, the central square of the city was packed. A diverse crowd, young and old, entire families, uniformed police officers, and ordinary citizens, gathered for the unveiling of a new monument. In the center of the square, covered by a large blue cloth, was what everyone eagerly awaited to see. Henry Turner, now 69 years old but with a renewed sparkle in his eyes, stepped up to the podium. Beside him stood Jason Carter, the young detective whose act of courage had triggered a silent revolution. "My friends," Henry began, his strong voice echoing through the square. "A year ago, I was behind bars, wrongfully accused of a crime I didn't commit. Today, I stand before you not just as a free man, but as a symbol of hope." The crowd erupted in applause, many with tears in their eyes. Henry raised his hand, calling for silence. "But I am not here to talk about myself. I am here to talk about us. About our city, our community, and the power we have when we unite against injustice." Jason stepped forward, continuing where Henry left off. What happened a year ago was not just about police corruption or an innocent man imprisoned. It was about how sometimes the system we swore to protect can turn against those who need it most. Jason's words resonated deeply with the crowd. Many nodded, recalling the shocking revelations that came to light after the arrest of Blake and his accomplices. But today, Jason continued, we are not here to remember the darkness. We are here to celebrate the light. The light of truth, justice, and integrity that never extinguished, even in the darkest moments. With a gesture, Jason signaled, and the large blue cloth was removed, revealing the monument. It was a bronze statue depicting two figures, an elderly firefighter, standing tall, symbolizing strength and dignity, and beside him, a young police officer, with one hand on the firefighter's shoulder and the other outstretched, as if pointing toward the future. At the base of the statue, a bronze plaque shone in the morning sun. In honor of all those who stand firm in the face of injustice. May this statue serve as a reminder that truth always prevails and that each of us has the power to make a difference. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Many embraced, moved by the powerful message the monument conveyed. But the unveiling of the monument was just the beginning. In the months following the exposure of the corruption scheme, the city underwent a profound and comprehensive transformation. The police department, under new leadership, implemented a series of radical reforms. A citizen oversight board was established, composed of community members from diverse backgrounds. This board had the authority to review cases of police misconduct and make binding recommendations. Jason Carter, now the youngest chief of police in the city's history, led the creation of a new training program for officers. The program emphasized not only tactical skills but also empathy, conflict resolution, and an understanding of the social complexities of the community they served. Henry Turner, in turn, became a central figure in this new training program. He regularly shared his story with the cadets, reminding them of the impact their actions could have on people's lives. You are not just enforcing the law, Henry told the young officers. You are protecting lives, dreams, and the very fabric of our society. Never forget that. Henry and Jason's story inspired changes beyond the city's borders. State legislators, moved by the injustice suffered by Henry, proposed and passed a series of criminal justice reform laws. These included measures to strengthen independent oversight of police forces, increase penalties for police misconduct, and improve the review processes for potentially unjust cases. Local and national media played a crucial role in disseminating the story and maintaining pressure for change. Investigative journalists, inspired by Jason's courage, began to dig deeper into other possible cases of corruption across the country. A young reporter, Sarah Chin, gained national attention for her series of articles titled Beyond Henry: The Hidden Faces of Injustice. In it, Sarah explored similar cases to Henry's in other cities, revealing a disturbing pattern of judicial errors and systemic corruption. The impact of these revelations was seismic. Across the country, police departments began to review old cases, resulting in the release of dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals. Civil rights advocacy groups saw a significant increase in support and resources as more people became aware of the flaws in the criminal justice system. But not all changes were easy or welcomed by everyone. There was resistance, especially from more conservative sectors of society that feared the reforms could weaken law enforcement and increase crime. Jason and Henry faced threats and intimidation from individuals who felt threatened by the changes. On one tense night, Jason's house was vandalized, with threatening messages painted on his front door. However, the community quickly rallied around them. The morning after the attack, hundreds of citizens gathered in front of Jason's house, forming a human shield of protection and solidarity. This demonstration of community unity became a turning point. Even those who were initially skeptical about the reforms began to see the positive power they were having in building trust between the police and the community. A year after the inauguration of the monument, the crime rate in the city had dropped significantly. But more important than the statistics was the tangible change in the city's atmosphere. There was a renewed sense of trust and cooperation between the citizens and law enforcement. On a quiet afternoon, Henry was walking through the city park when he was approached by a young man. The boy, with tears in his eyes, introduced himself as the son of one of the officers who had been arrested during the corruption investigation. "Mr. Turner," the young man said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I wanted to hate you because of what happened to my dad. But after hearing your story, seeing how you reacted to all of this, I understand. I understand that what happened was not your fault, but the result of wrong choices made by my dad and others." Henry, deeply touched, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time we fall. Your dad made mistakes, yes, but that does not define who you are or who you can become." That casual encounter in the park symbolized something larger that was happening throughout the city. A process of healing and reconciliation. The wounds left by corruption and injustice were deep, but they were being treated with compassion, understanding, and a shared commitment to a better future. Meanwhile, at the City Hall, a new initiative was taking shape. Inspired by Henry and Jason's story, the mayor announced the creation of a mentorship program called Bridges of Trust. The program paired police officers with young people from the community, especially those from historically marginalized neighborhoods. Jason was invited to lead the first group of the program. In his opening speech, he shared a powerful reflection. "When I was a child, growing up in a difficult neighborhood, I saw the police as the enemy. Today, as police chief, I understand that this distrust is a cycle we need to break. We cannot just demand trust from the community. We have to earn it, day by day, action by action." The Bridges of Trust program quickly became a national model, with other cities adopting similar initiatives. As the second anniversary of the events that changed the city approached, Henry Turner received news that left him speechless. The governor of the state announced that October 15th, the date on which Henry was released from prison, would be officially recognized as Integrity and Justice Day. In his statement, the governor said, "Henry Turner's story reminds us that justice is not always perfect, but it is our continuous duty to fight for it. His resilience and Detective Carter's courage are a testament to the best of our human nature." On the eve of the first Integrity and Justice Day, Henry sat on his porch, contemplating the sunset. Margaret, now fully recovered from her battle with cancer, joined him, intertwining her fingers with his. "Have you ever imagined," Margaret said softly, "that all that pain and injustice would lead to something so beautiful?" Henry smiled, gently squeezing his wife's hand. "No, my love. But it taught me that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance for redemption, for transformation." As the last lights of the day painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Henry reflected on the incredible journey he had lived. From hero to villain and back to hero, his life had become a testament to the power of integrity and perseverance. Somewhere in the city, Jason Carter was preparing his speech for the next day. He knew that the changes they had achieved were just the beginning. There was still much work to be done, many minds to be changed, many systems to be reformed. But looking out the window of his office, seeing the city lights he vowed to protect, Jason felt a wave of hope. He thought of Henry, of all the innocent people who had suffered unjustly, and of all those still fighting for justice. With renewed determination, Jason returned to his speech. The words flowed easily now, filled with purpose and vision. "Tomorrow, as we mark Integrity and Justice Day, we will not only be celebrating the past. We will be committing to a future where justice is not just an ideal, but a lived reality for all. A future where every citizen, regardless of their background or position, can trust that they will be treated with dignity and respect. A future that we build together, one act of courage at a time." And so, as the city fell asleep, a new chapter was about to begin. A story not just of Henry Turner or Jason Carter, but of an entire community that chose to stand up against injustice and build a brighter future for all. The legacy of their journey would continue to inspire future generations, reminding everyone that, even in the darkest hours, the light of truth and justice can shine, illuminating the way to a better world. If you enjoyed this story, please leave your like and follow the channel so you don't miss any news. And don't leave just yet. The next video brings an unforgettable and even more exciting story. Click to check it out.